So hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Pivot of Change. I'm really happy to have a special guest today, Evette Rose. And Evette is an author, life coach, and trauma release practitioner and personal development teacher. And she's also the founder of Metaphysical Anatomy, where we go in a little bit deeper. And she's also the co-founder of different personal development companies. So I'm really happy to have you here, Evette.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for creating also the time and the space here for your audience for us to connect and to share ideas and share our experiences.
Yeah, great. So what I'm really interested in is kind of what is your own experience with physical illness, and maybe share when did you discover how like our suppressed emotions are also connected to the physical ailments we have.
Right. So for me, my journey was kind of, some people kind of, we're born and we have this vision, we have this idea that we want to help people. We have this vision of maybe they want to be a speaker, or maybe they want to be a doctor, or my vision was to become a lawyer. So, and I never ended up becoming one because my life just actually, I happened to just fall into this industry by pure chance, by just working on myself. So of course we are all connected and drawn to these modalities because there's something in our lives that's not working for us. And I found myself at that exact same point where, there's this feeling of this physical, emotional discomfort that starts to brew in us until it gets more uncomfortable and more uncomfortable, or the pain starts to get higher and higher and higher, until it calls us into action, and we just realize we just have to finally listen whether we like it or not and create change, because something needs to change. And then we all embark on that journey trying to discover what needs to change. And so for me, what I realized, what was a big problem for me was I had a lot of digestive issues. I had hypertension. I had severe anxiety, and I don't know if this is an actual term, but in Metaphysical Anatomy, in my modality, I call it like the black depression, where I was struggling with severe depression. It's like, yeah, it was it was horrible. I would not wish that on anyone, and I'm sure other people who actually have that can very strongly relate to that. And it was the kind of depression where medication didn't even make a difference for me. I just stayed at that chronically low level, and I'm realizing, wow. So if something in my hormonal system and brain functioning is being interfered with, and I'm still not having a relief, which you medically speaking should, something else must be going on. Something else must be happening. And with my diet as well, my stomach, always having stomach problems, bloatedness and cramps. And this is something that's actually quite a general medical problem now in society as well. And just starting to work through myself and through my own journey. And this discomfort that I felt pushed me to a crossroad. And when I say crossroad, I mean, I was at a point of suicide. I was like, I can't handle the anxiety anymore. I can't handle the depression anymore. I can't handle the chronic problems with my stomach, because I'm sure anyone here who knows, who have digestive issues, if your stomach is upset, your entire day is upside down. It has a ripple effect into absolutely everything. And the hypertension, the fast rate, heart beating, always sweating, always feeling nervous, always feeling like I'm on edge. It's like you're waiting for something to happen, but you don't know what, because nothing in your environment showing you that you need to be on edge. And just getting to that point where I realized I don't want to live like this anymore, because I've wrapped my whole life around coping with these symptoms, right? Because that's ultimately what we do. We learn to just survive. We don't thrive anymore. We learn to cope. We don't deal with the issues that's causing us the need to cope. And so what I realized was there's people around me that's happy. There's people around me that doesn't have the issues that I do. Why are they happy and I'm not? Like, what are they doing that I'm not? What is that missing step? And that's when I realized, okay, if it's really that simple, how to be happy? That's the question that came into my mind that day when I thought, okay, I'm done. I want to put myself out of this misery. And I Googled. Because I didn't have any answers. I was out of resources. I was out of emotional resources. I was out of physical resources. I was rock bottom. And so I just Googled. out of desperation, how to be happy. And then I saw all these personal development courses coming up, and I thought, wow, this is going to help me deal with my mind and this depression and anxiety in my stomach. Like, really? Because of course, as many of us, I've been to doctors, I've been to practitioners, and they've given me, medication, or then there's this herbal remedy, and then there's all these things which had a slight improvement, but not enough to actually improve my quality of life. And so then what happened was, and that's what made me think that there's other people out there that also have had issues, and then they're happy again. Something is happening. Of course, my ego, I didn't want to ask because I didn't want to let people know the pain that I'm in. I didn't want to expose myself because of the vulnerability, which is a shame. And it's an absolute shame now that I think back to it, because we're suffering because we're keeping silent. How can we be helped if we don't speak up? So that was a very big lesson, first of all, for me, is learning how to speak up so that I can actually allow myself to be supported. But then, of course, I didn't have positive associations with support. So I rejected support. I rejected the very thing that I needed, right? So, and then it came to the point where I thought, okay, you know what? I went from being an extreme Christian as a child to being an extreme atheist. Now I have to look at the fact that there could be guides around me, that I can do all this stuff that I can't see. Like, really? It was challenging. But I was so desperate that I thought, you know what? I'm going to jump into that rabbit hole. I'm going to just close my eyes. You know how sometimes when you have to do something that you're scared, or you have to jump off something, or you're in a swimming pool and you don't want to jump off a height, you just close your eyes and you just scream and you just jump. That's exactly what I felt like I was doing. And so I got into these modalities, and I thought, wow, I'm starting to feel changes. I'm starting to feel shifts. I'm starting to feel like a lightness, a sense of inner freedom starting to peek out its head, but not enough. And I thought, if this is already happening, there must be a way to push it all the way. There has to be a way, because I realized that it was my childhood trauma and stress. There was sexual abuse, there was rape trauma. I had a horrific relationship with my dad. We did not get along at all. If anything, he's probably the reason behind all my success, because everything that I went through in my life trying to get over and process was because as a result of my relationship with him. And of course, other things that happened outside of my dynamic with my dad as well. And I started feeling these improvements. And so I realized that the more I was working, the more I was kind of like tapping into energy and sources and fields outside of me. And I realized, it just dawned on me one day, Evette, the problem is here. It's in the body. What are you doing outside of the body? And I thought, okay, all right, I'm listening. Okay, so I started meditating, because I was thinking, how do I connect to what my body wants to say? Because if there's pain, there's a reason why there's pain. We ignore it because we're designed to avoid pain. So of course we try to dissociate, we try to find coping mechanisms around that. But in this case, I realized, okay, the pain is there. That's a language. The body doesn't speak English. So we have to figure out, what language does it speak? And it speaks the language of elements. It speaks the language of, diseases and mental disorders and emotions and stress and tension. That's how the body speaks, because it doesn't know how else to communicate to us. So of course it creates discomfort, because that's when we listen. When things go really well, we don't pay attention. But when there's discomfort, we pay attention. And so the body knows that. So it pokes around at things that's going to cause you discomfort for us to look. And that's exactly what happened with me. And so I learned to meditate, just 2-3 minutes meditating, because ultimately I hated silence. I hated it when things were quiet. I don't know if you can relate if you're listening, but silence, I hated silence. I hated peace around me, because that's when the pain came up. That's when the real deep pain came up. That's when the bad and the negative thoughts started coming up, because my whole life was shaped and shifted around avoiding these thoughts, avoiding these emotions, these coping mechanisms, drinking, smoking, excessive exercising. I had anorexia, bulimia, everything to just not feel. And I realized I was suppressing the very thing that I needed to access in order to get better. And I had a fear of reliving the pain. I had a fear of being in pain again, because, and I'm sure you can relate to that as well, we don't like that. No one wants to be in pain. No one wants to relive the past. And so I decided, okay, I'm just going to tap into this a little bit and just see how this goes, because I'm an experimenter. I love to kind of like dive into things. I love being curious about certain possibilities, because that's how we continue to evolve and grow and heal, is through our curiosity. So that's a beautiful quality that we have as humans that we should continue to nurture, because it's through that curiosity that we continue to grow and expand and ultimately transform. And so I continue to be curious. It's like the cat, is always like wondering what's going to happen, what's going to, it never stops. It continues to poke around until it finds out what's under that blanket or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here I am trying to poke around and trying to find what could be there in that place of silence. And so I started to connect more, and I realized that there were actually messages, there were stories being held in my body. And so in my stomach, for example, they were like stories. I would hear like voices of me arguing, for example, with my mom, or arguing with my dad, family arguments where I'm like, who's these people coming up? Like, what? And I realized that we store our family dynamics and traumas associated with that, trauma associated with communication with our family, we store in the stomach area. Like the stomach is mom, small intestines is family dynamics, and the colon is dad. And I'm like, how interesting is that? And what was even more interesting for me was that the more I started working on myself and I started seeing results, the more I started playing with these modalities and bringing something together that resonated with me, because some of the modalities that I use kind of stop to a certain extent. It's not that they don't work. I've just outgrown what I needed from that modality. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of got to a point where nothing was really giving me that next step. And I thought, okay, I can't find it, so I'm going to create it. So that's when I started playing around with it, and I started finding something that really helped me to push myself up to the next step. And I started sharing it with people, and they also started getting results. But what I noticed was what I found and listened to from the certain elements that I felt in me, and the messages that was there was so consistent with other people that also had irritable bowel syndrome, for example. I'm like, oh my God, how can someone, for me from South Africa, have the same issues as someone from, say, for example, Australia, and completely different lives, completely different upbringings, but we share the same core traumas. And that's what brings us together, as to having the same elements. But then the more that I did my research, the more I also realized that what I and these other people shared, and everyone else that I found a consistency with the ailments, was that there was a predisposition already within the biological makeup from our ancestry, already heightened, and certain stress factors and emotional and environmental factors would trigger off the predisposition of those ailments. And those ailments were there in them because of the pattern of emotional stress that accumulated over the generations, making that person more vulnerable and having a heightened sensitivity to experiencing, for example, irritable bowel syndrome, where someone else in my life can have the exact same childhood as me, but they don't have irritable bowel syndrome. And I thought, wow, we stretch so far beyond just us, because we are an expression of our ancestry. But we don't seem to understand fully the power that history has over our quality of life in the here and now. So that's how I kind of started getting into this, into these modalities, and I'm trying to understand the elements, because it all started with my stomach, because I had a bit of a love affair with cake and cheesecake, and I'm like, I can't eat this because it was just bloatedness. I would feel sick. My stomach would, I would have the opposite of diarrhea, constipation. It's like, it was horrible. I mean, so many out there who has digestive issues, I'm sure you feel me on that one, because it's not fun. And I was even more determined because of that to find a solution. There has to be a solution.
Yeah, you did find it, which is incredible. Yeah. So actually, I am someone that does also have a little bit of digestive issues as well. I still kind of. Because I'm really sensitive, there are some foods I kind of avoid now. But also what I realized with me getting sick, when I was 18, I had a heart attack, and that kind of led me to dive deeper into the work of how physical ailments kind of also have like underneath an emotional cause. And it's also really right about what you said about the ancestry. So it is with me, it's been really clear in my lineage from my father's side, like heart disease has been like the number one thing. And when I really got it myself, and what I became aware of is kind of how mainly stress and anxiety really influenced my heart. And also like to hear your view on it as well, how kind of anxiety and stress, how it can create these ailments. And I know also that with which is also kind of really in my family as well, is a lot of grief, which is also what I know a little bit more of an emotional cause on it. So maybe if you can share your perspective on it, how kind of stress and ailments, how they kind of correlate.
Of course. So what happens is that when you look at let's start from the beginning, and then I'm going to work and explain it from into the here and now. So when we look at the DNA lineage way back in the days where there was trauma, there was stress, and the coping mechanisms that they had at the time. Now, if a certain amount of stress is repeated over generation, you're either going to have an oversensitivity to it or a numbness to it, depending on how the ancestors coped with this level of stress, right? So you either become more numb, which is the dissociative state, which becomes stronger, or you can go the opposite way, which is become more sensitive, and overreactive to that. Now, it just really depends how these ancestors coped and dealt with this stress that continued to be repeated. And that threshold, whether it's high or low in you, will then be determined as a result of that. Now, the body, firstly, is not designed to cope with long periods of stress. It's just not designed for that. I mean, if it was, then we wouldn't be struggling with all these ailments. We wouldn't be struggling with chronic fatigue and adrenal fatigue and depression and anxiety, just to mention a few. It's just not designed to cope with it. It's designed to deal with stress. It's not weak, don't get me wrong. It's strong. It's incredibly strong, but not over long periods of time consistently. Because what happens is that now you have the trauma taking place. You build coping mechanisms around trying to cope with the consequences of the trauma. Because, of course, we're trying to avoid the pain. We don't want to go back to that and heal it. So we try to cope with the symptoms of it, which is drinking, smoking. It can be excessive exercising. It can be something done in excess, which becomes addictive. So that's also where addictive behaviors and patterns come from. So when you start looking at that now with this, whether it's heightened or numbed, if it's heightened, then of course you're going to be overreactive, meaning your stress hormones, the part in your brain that's going to release the cortisol saying, hey, there's stress, let's get ready to fight or flight, that gets released. And it's supposed to shut down and calm down after 20 minutes. But if you stay in that heightened state of distress, which oversensitive people do, then that cycle never switches off. After 20 minutes, boom, the cycle of stress hormones sets off again, and it continues to release cortisol that's not being used in the body. It continues for you to sit in a state of fight or flight. But then your frontal cortex, you consciously see there's nothing validating. Why should I run from what? There's nothing around me, but the body's feeling it. You're in a state of distress because it's now triggering unconscious memories either in your life or from the ancestry. Now, the problem is a lot of these memories are implicit. We don't consciously, meaning we cannot consciously recall it. We can't go directly back to that. So we just feel the way that we do, but we can't make the connection. So of course, oh God, there's probably just anxiety. It's probably just stress. So now we plaster it with all these different coping mechanisms because we don't know what else to do with it. Now, on top of that, what also happens is these stress hormones. That depletes the immune system. It depletes the body and it starts to pull resources, minerals, vitamins from all sorts of parts of the body. And now you have stress coming from the environment as well that's not healthy, that's toxic, and challenging the body's health. And your immune system is being overloaded. It's a matter of time before it collapses. And then whichever part psychosomatically inside the body is the weakest, that part is going to suffer the most. And boom, you're going to have an ailment coming forward that's probably either from the ancestry, or you never know, you just might have a new one that you just developed and created in your life based on all these different predispositions coming together, creating this recipe for a new ailment, depending on the weakness inside of the body, where the body took the most resources and minerals or vitamins or different energetic aspects where it took too much. So then we have a new problem. So I hope did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, because it really clearly explains how the stress kind of, and then it's really where you have, like what you mentioned, the preposition. So, and that's also really determined by your ancestry and what's already happened in your current life.
And then also, just to add to that, you know, someone, for example, that's very numb, very dissociative. That's why there's this philosopher that made a quote where he said, if it doesn't break you, it makes you stronger. Well, that quote should be deleted from history, because that's not the case. It doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you more numb, and you dissociate even more from the trauma and stress. So what you're actually going into is, you think you're being strong, but you're actually going into a more dissociative state of numbness. And that state of numbness can only hold you for that long, until that structure collapses. And then you go into what's called the breakdown, psychological breakdown, panic, meltdown, whatever it is that you want to call it. And then you have the issues that you haven't been looking at coming up, and you have a whole new problem on your hands.
Yeah. And what can we kind of do to find kind of resolution for the stress, or ways to release the stress? Because we, like you said, we carry way too much for our body to hold and to completely function well. So what would you recommend? So
firstly is to understand that the body has trauma cycles. We have trauma cycles that need to complete. But because we don't recognize it, or we associate something negative with it, like shame or guilt or panic, or there's something wrong with the body, my body's malfunctioning, what do I do? And then taking actions to suppress these cycles from taking place. And then what happens is you lock the trauma into the body. You lock everything into place just for it to be re-triggered again down the line, as you know, as certain relationship dynamics can play out, or your environment can trigger that. And it gets locked into the unconscious mind even more. So there we have what's called also neuroplasticity, where the neural pathways either become weaker or stronger. In this case, the pathway with the negative memories just becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So, and that locks the trauma in even more. So, like for example, crying is a really good example of a trauma cycle trying to complete. But look at the tragic negative associations that we have associated with something that's normal. Now you have a cycle completing, and people go, "Oh my God, she's crying," and then you feel shame, and you shut down the cycle. Or you know, kids get spanked when they're crying, when they're feeling sad or upset, and then the cycle gets locked in. And also, for example, if you start to shake, you know, especially if you were in a car accident, or you witnessed something that was shocking, and you feel your body starting to shiver a little bit, the worst thing that you can do is hug someone at that time, or put a blanket over them. The worst thing that you can do, you lock in the trauma. You just added 5 to 6 years of psychological sessions to that person's life. Right? So the body needs to complete that cycle, let it shake. Hyperventilating is another really good example. The body is overwhelmed and is trying to decompress and to release the stress and to get the atomic nervous system to calm down. Because the atomic nervous system is actually connected to the nervous system, but also to physical muscles in the body that is specifically dedicated to the instinctive responses in the brain. So when there's a fight or flight situation coming up, the physical body reacts. Right? So now it's these muscles that's trying to shake off the stress and holding that adrenaline and the cortisol. But we stop the process. Now what happens is, in that moment, is that you lock in the trauma. The instinctive response that you felt at that time is locked in. The emotions that you felt at the time is locked in. And these emotions and instinctive responses now go together like that. So every time when that emotion is triggered, the instinctive response could be triggered, and vice versa. The body might not react as intensely. It might come through as anxiety, because you don't have conscious awareness of, oh, that moment when that cycle was interrupted, that's now coming up to be completed. Or it can be something from your childhood. You don't have a conscious awareness to make the connection. That's where it's going to. So, and I just wanted to add that to that, because that's incredibly important. So now, here's where it gets messy. Now we try to tap into different memories of our childhood. Most of our memories from childhood sometimes could be made up, because most of us go through our childhood with what is called amnesia, because some events were so painful that the frontal cortex goes offline. It's not even feeding in what's happening, but the unconscious mind remembers. That unconscious mind never stops programming, and what you physically feel and emotionally feel gets programmed. And now we feel these emotional triggers coming up later in our life. We get activated and we go, oh my God, why do I feel this? If I feel this, then maybe something like that happened, because I can imagine that if that happened, this is how I would feel. And boom, out of desperation, a false memory is created, and you spend the rest of your life trying to heal a memory of something that never happened. So that is why it's incredibly important to work past this numbness, to work past the memories, acknowledge the memories, because you never know, they might be right. But what's important is, how did those memories make you feel? And when you tap into your emotions, when you start connecting to that, that is when you start tapping into the limbic system, the hippocampus. That's the emotional brain. That's where we store long-term emotional memories and sentimental memories, whether it's positive or negative. And that's what you want to get stimulated and tap into that, and to heal the stress that's held there, and then release that. And along, of course, with the reptilian mind, which is the instinctive responses are being held, because the limbic system and the reptilian mind in metaphysical anatomy specifically is the main culprits. And the relationship that these two have is very unhealthy sometimes, because that's what locks in certain patterns. Because am I going too fast? Are you still with me?
No, I'm with you. Just continue. Yeah. Okay.
I get so passionate. And then, can you tell?
Yeah.
And so what happens is that you have an emotional trauma or stress that's now triggered because of the situation. But most cases, the instinctive response comes first, because that's always active. Always active. Now it depends. Sometimes the instinctive response is so subtle that we feel the emotion first, but always the instinctive response comes first. But as a ripple effect, because the emotion is the strongest, it has the hardest grip on us because of the nervous system, how the emotion runs through us. And that's where our attention then goes to, is the emotional stress that gets triggered. Now, it's because of the relationship with these two, of these constant triggers, the body's reliving the trauma, we can't consciously connect. So what do? We find ways to cope with the symptoms. And then, because of the coping mechanisms that we develop based on the symptoms and the consequences of old trauma, we create new secondary problems, new secondary issues. And then what happens later in life, we try to heal the issues as a result of the secondary problems. Not even the initial symptoms, but the secondary symptoms. And then we wonder, why don't we heal?
Yeah.
So I hope that covers.
Yeah, because what it really explains kind of is as well how you really explained very well also about kind of how we then just avoid getting into the pain because we're afraid to relive it. And what I think which happens in like more talkative therapy a lot is, she mentioned as well, that we start to think of a memory or kind of try to rationally explain why we're dealing with certain issues. Well, it might be that, but it can also be something completely different which is in your unconscious, so you're completely unaware of. So it's kind of better to use the emotions as guidance towards finding what it is. Then
I can't stress enough how important that is. I can't tell you how many clients I've had that's healed something that never happened. And then they wonder why they don't get better.
Yeah, so when you work with clients, you also use your own technique, which is called the Metaphysical Anatomy technique. So could you maybe explain how that goes for someone who's really new to it? So how it kind of works? Yeah.
Of course. So the technique is super easy. It's fun. It's gentle and it's simple, because some people kind of like, they go like, oh, did that actually work? Wow, that's really cool. Because they wait for the drama. They wait for the stress and the reliving of it. Like this, it's almost like people feel that if there was no pain involved, then I didn't really heal much then. Because we're so used to having to suffer for results. We're so used to having to work hard for success that we actually bring that mentality into our healing development and healing journeys as well. Well, it's kind of like I push it out the door, because we don't have to relive trauma or pain in order to heal from that. There's no need for that. So the technique is specifically designed to actually allow people not to have to relive the trauma, because what happens is when we relive the trauma, firstly, you create that the trauma now starts to, you can either have a new neural pathway starting to build, which is called neurogenesis, based on the trauma of feeling the trauma again, because it was so intense and all the right chemicals were released to promote new neural pathways growing, or you just you make that the neuroplasticity aspect of the neural pathways even stronger. And you actually create new points in the body where the trauma now gets anchored in and stored in that moment where you're reliving it, because it's a new memory that you're creating in that moment. So what I did was observing how the body stores trauma. And the nervous system, the mind, the limbic system, the reptilian brain always plays a role. It doesn't really store it there, but it has that constant reaction. And then the memory of that reaction is stored in the limbic system. And then you also have the amygdala, which is our inner 4-year-old panic button that goes off when something stressful happens and it goes spastic. You know, sometimes people who has like this hysteria, or they're overly scared or panicking all the time, they have an overactive amygdala. People from post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, is a really good example of that. And so just by observing how the body stores trauma, I'm like, there has to be a way for it to gently release this in the same sequence without having to go in there and poking at it. And I realized that if the body is addressed in a specific way in MIT, we look at the nervous system, we work with actual parts of the hippocampus, like the limbic system. We work with parts of the frontal cortex by learning how to connect to that. And then we also connect and learn different parts of the body and where we hold certain emotions, which is consistent for us from regardless of where you're from in the world. It's consistent. And that's the beauty of MIT, is that we all share the same biological makeup, which means we store trauma the same way and we can heal it the same way. Where and how the traumas can go in different directions, like a rabbit hole almost, can be different for us. However, the technique also covers those aspects to learn, is this my emotions? Is it not? Okay, this is an ancestor. Okay, great. This is the tool that I need to use for that. Or no, this is something that happened in my life, which can also actually be related to an ancestral trauma, because you feel that because the predisposition to feel this certain action is already there, right? So ultimately, it always comes from the ancestry as well. But there's something, if you can consciously relate to happening in your life, perfect, then we can heal it in this lifetime. And so looking at also how we copy certain aspects and energetic patterns and isms from other people, and how that plays a role and actually influences our personality, which we call soul copies, and learning how to tackle that and heal that as well. And secondary gains and hidden benefits also, we really dive into that, looking at how certain coping mechanisms has now become a way of life. You know, it's almost like when we talk about abuse these days, you know, abuse is the new normal. It's just normal. So it's bringing awareness to where we didn't have awareness before, because awareness of a problem is a problem half solved, right? So if you have awareness of what we need to deal with, then the other 50% is the technique. And that's the recipe for a really good technique. And that's what I realized with Metaphysical Anatomy, is that even if we are in a place of discomfort, like something's not quite right, I don't know quite what it is, no problem. We'll find it. We'll find it, figure it out, work through the emotions, and find the instinctive responses, how that locked in, how to unlock that easily, how to tap into the unconscious mind and get these associations, for example, dislodged, so that we can continue to live our life. Because here's the thing. When we do healing work, we heal and we change, but then sometimes things can keep coming back. You know, it's like we work on our abundance issues, but then they keep manifesting abundance because, you know, consciously, you know, abundance will be great. It's a positive thing. But then there could be still trauma, unresolved trauma with abundance, but this might just be a little speck of it. But now if for example, you have a negative association with abundance as a result of the trauma, meaning every time when I'm abundant, people in my family was killed. Wow, that's a powerful association to have. So of course, you are going, consciously you want it. So you create your life and set it up to attract it. But unconsciously your body's like, what are you doing? We're going to die. What are you doing? Right? So unconsciously you start to sabotage getting all this abundance. And then we wonder, why can't I manifest abundance? Right? It's the same thing. If you were as a child abused and all that you wanted was love, and your need for love was met by feeling attacked, violated, and abused. Okay, you grow up. Consciously, you know what love should look and feel like. You know what respect should look and feel like. We have a generalized idea. But if there's still a little bit of trauma there, and you, every time, and you send out the signal, I want love, And the unconscious mind's like, I got you, no problem. We're going to get love. We're going to see who's a vibrational match of who can make you feel attacked, abused, and violated. Perfect. Mm-hmm. Where's your partner? Here comes the partner. Mm-hmm. And your need for love is met. In a toxic way, not what you wanted, but the unconscious mind, unfortunately, is in control. It's not the frontal cortex. It's not the conscious mind. So that's why people say, I'm going to go manifest my love, the love of my life. And I'm like, well, what's your definition, firstly, of love? What's your associations with love? Do you have trauma associated with it? Have we looked at this? Right? So just to give an example there, the power of the unconscious mind as well, which is incredibly important. And then it's tapping into these aspects that feels challenging, but it's actually not. It's actually not. And the biggest challenge that people feel, and what they normally say, is that I'm not psychic. I'm not intuitive. I don't know how to look into the body. I don't know how to listen to messages. Well, perfect. If that's you, excellent. MAT knocks that out of the ballpark. I'm very well known for helping people to open up their intuition. That's the least of your worries. It's more about having the right mindset when you come to the event, to be ready, to really be ready to explore. And secondly, be ready to have fun, because healing is such a heavy topic sometimes. It's so depressing, it's like you don't really look forward to it. People get nervous, but I'm like, no, we're going to make this fun. We're going to make this lighthearted, and we're going to find fun and creative ways to really ease through these challenges. So that's what Metaphysical Anatomy is, kind of in a really nice short nutshell. And secondly, also something that I want to add as well for the technique is we look at a lot of womb developmental trauma. So we do a lot of womb work. So if you're a guy, don't worry, we're not talking about your womb. We're talking about the time when you were in your mom's womb. Mm-hmm. That plays a tremendously big role, huge role, because even from the moment of your conception, your parents' consciousness at the time of your conception sets the platform for your consciousness as well. It sets the platform for so many core beliefs and values that you have in your life as well. And I understand there's a lot of passion happening in that moment, but in what led up to that moment, mom and dad has their own dominant emotional states, and probably had for, say, a week to 2 weeks up before the time, that can play a tremendous role and influence that consciousness as well. Mm. Then we also have that time, because you as a little fetus in the sperm and the egg, there's already a consciousness there. There's already an awareness there, a very alert and intelligent awareness. You don't need an intellectual brain to have intelligent awareness. We all know that by now, because the heart and the brain is already like a non-local consciousness focus point for holding intelligent information that's completely unrelated to the physical body. And so these aspects are already, from that consciousness perspective, already active in these moments and absorbing and collecting all this information as well from its environment. And now you mature in the womb with your mom. And we know now that placenta is not a barrier between the mother and the child anymore, because the protein cells in the lining of the placenta is already absorbing the mother's trauma and stress. But now we also have mom 70% water, you are 70% water, and you're hanging in this amniotic sac. And we know what a great conduit water is for being like an emotional transmitter, transmitting emotions and vibrations and frequencies. If your mom is always in a state of anger or depression, that's going to penetrate right through you. So based on your genetic predispositions and how you're storing trauma and what parts in the physical body is strengthened and weakened, depending on the psychosomatic and emotional stress and the impact that it's had from the DNA lineage, and now the development of these different organs and different body parts. These negative emotions is like a magnet, and it sits in these weakened areas, and it gets programmed and recorded there. I know you don't even have an intellectual brain for it to be stored all these memories in the brain, because that's not really where memories are. Something really beautiful and interesting is that as you mature, actually, genetic memories are actually stored and held in the heart. That's why people don't always, it's about knowing where to look, where certain emotional stress factors are, right? It's like just having that awareness is already putting you so far ahead of the game. Now it's just a matter of figuring out and learning and understanding, how do I release that? And how do I do a good job of it so that I don't have to go back to deal with this again, right? So we look at those aspects as well. And then the identity overlap between you and your mom. I mean, so many people that's battling anxiety don't realize that they're battling with their mom's anxiety, for example, because of the programming that can happen in the womb. Or the anxiety can be as a result of a soul copy, of meaning an energetic personality snapshot that you copied from someone else. That's in your field, and you're reacting and responding to that. So we look at all these different points and teaching people how to easily just tap into that, to release it, and let life go on.
Yeah. And so it's kind of, it also creates a map so you kind of know exactly what to look for. So it's a lot easier, even for someone who thinks they're less intuitive, because everyone naturally is intuitive.
So, and just to add to what you said there, so you just sparked my memory of what I wanted to add to that. Just to answer your question about the technique, also the technique, it literally has a structure that you follow step by step. You don't have to sit there and then try to figure out, okay, but if that happens, then how do I intuitively swing it to this way, and what do I do if that happens? There's literally a structure, because it really is that easy to just follow the structure. And then you have Metaphysical Anatomy, the big book, the 700 and I don't know how many pages, but with 679 medical ailments in there that you can look at to help you with advice and guidance, and combine that then with the session sheet that you learn in the level 1 and level 1 course, but also the level 2 live event. And you can combine that, and you will be so extremely accurate that you will blow your clients away. And if you are your own practitioner, you will blow yourself away, because the live events also, you don't, it's practitioner certification is completely optional. If you don't want to become a practitioner, no problem. At least then become your practitioner.
Yeah, so you can also use it just for yourself. You don't have to be like a health practitioner at all.
One thing that I felt passionate was to actually design the technique so that people can use it on themselves.
Okay. Yeah. So, and then with your technique, you don't actually relive the trauma, right? That's kind of the difference when you compare it to other modalities. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And
was that,
why did you kind of why did you choose that, to not relive it fully?
Because of the first explanation that I gave was, remember what I said earlier, how you actually strengthen the neural pathways and the memories held in the body by coding it with a new layer of the same stress. So it's almost like you're heightening that trauma. A lot of practitioners don't always know how to get a client out of a traumatized state either. Because they get triggered. Then what? Now you have a massive mess on your hands. And then what? That person walks away and they're triggered, they're upset. And that happened to me. That's why I'm so incredibly passionate about not doing that, because I firsthand understand what it feels like. I was working on my sexual abuse trauma, and the trauma got triggered, and I felt like I was reliving it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is horrific. Like, it was so severe. It felt to the point where I wanted to commit suicide. I needed to just get these feelings to stop. I mean, for anyone that's been sexually abused and who can consciously remember and recall that, or who has a recent experience with that, will understand if I say it's a horrific experience to relive that. And I didn't know what to do, because she shared the same trauma as me. So she was triggered. I went home. Yeah, right? Two people with the same issue. No one can help each other. And so I went home, and it was at that exact same stage and point in my life where I just started to develop MAT, and I had the structure, and I was crying so much I couldn't even read the structure. I was so distressed and disorientated that I couldn't remember the process. So I called a friend, as we do in a crisis, right? And I said to her, listen, I need you to just read this out to me. Just read it. Just talk me through it. And so she did that, and the trauma stopped immediately. And I'm like, thank God. And then I started using the technique with other people who went through very traumatic situations as well, and realizing, wow, they're not reliving it. They're not reliving it. I'm like, oh my God, it's not necessary. This technique is actually helping people to deal and access deep, deep pain without having to deal with it. Now, the beauty about MAT as well is that you don't have to remember what the trauma is. You don't have to have any zero recollection of that in order to tackle the symptoms and how the trauma made you feel.
Okay, so you do have like the moment of emotional release, But
Yes.
with your technique, you don't actually need to relive the memory or...
Correct.
Yeah, because that, of course, is really important, that the emotions are experienced and released. Yeah.
In that case, yes. So that, and what you're referring to is crying.
Yeah.
That's not reliving a trauma. That's a cycle completing.
Yeah.
That's a cycle completing. That's beautiful. That's perfect. And so when you cry it and just, and in that moment, then also the technique by connecting and addressing certain points, it releases the trauma fully, and let the crying cycle then complete. Sometimes people literally have tears still running, and they're sitting there and they're like, why am I crying? I don't feel anything. That's just the after effect of the actual pressure and the stress of the body just needing that physical release, even though the emotion is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because in the beginning, when you mentioned like someone that always feels like they have to work really hard for the healing, that's definitely me.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's not necessary. Like, why create pain when you're actually trying to get away from it?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to heal it? Like,
yeah, in
right?
a lot of ways, it has worked for me, actually.
Right.
But then what's really important, I think, for people who don't know, is when you're actually choosing to work with a practitioner that guides you back to the trauma.
Right.
What's most important is always to never leave someone in that state. And that's what happened to you, because then what actually happens, you re-traumatize, so it can actually be worse.
But the problem, I just want to add to what you said. I can't tell you how many people I've helped who's come to me and said, I first want to do a healing by just having to talk about this trauma that happened to me, and then crying in it and trying to get over it. Like, just having to talk about these traumas was re-traumatizing to them. So I had to do a session on them, on the sessions that they talked about it, that caused the trauma, not even the actual technique that caused them to relive it, but just talking about it.
Yeah.
Like, that in itself was traumatizing to them.
Yeah, because that's what I heard as well, is what you have with like talkative therapy, and that people kind of are forced to talk about what happened to them over and over and over and over and over again, and that is actually doing the opposite effect. So when the first time you talk about it, or then it can be a release, right? You can be express, and that is actually very healing. But when it happens, which we see in therapy a lot, over and over and over again, the opposite happens, because you're getting stuck in the past.
Exactly. So to talk about it is perfect as well. I mean, if someone feels comfortable to do that, I encourage it. I invite that. But now you have the other side of the spectrum, where someone doesn't feel comfortable to talk about it. What do you do with them? What do you do with them? But they still want to be helped. You don't show them away. And that's why I love MAT, because it's to support these people as well. Because just because they want to approach their pain a different way doesn't mean that they should be excluded. Right? So,
Yeah, definitely. Because I think a lot of people aren't really feel comfortable talking about it at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the shame associated with it as well. It's the fear of judgment. But then, like, okay, well, let's work on the fear of judgment, man. Let's work on the shame. Let's get that out of the way. And so when you work on the trauma then as well, then they'll probably end up talking about it like, it's just, I'm going to explain to you how to crack open an egg. Because the pain is not there anymore.
Yeah. And so what advice would you kind of give to someone who is now struggling with a specific physical ailment, or it might be more something like depression or anxiety, and they would kind of want to find a way to resolve that and find a resolution for it? What would you recommend them to do? Of course, very general, but I
have several options. So firstly, you're welcome to go grab your copy of Metaphysical Anatomy Volume 1 if you want to get like a deeper insight as to what the psychosomatic issues could be, the emotional patterns. I share key points of blocks in there as well that you could potentially be facing as well. And then, as complementary to the book, I also made an online healing session that's about half an hour long. And you can find that at www.guidedhealingsession.com. And there I take you through a process to help you find the hidden benefits, to understand what's happening with the unconscious messages that's there. And then at the end, we go through a healing process that I help you to start addressing the pain and the stress in the body, to start the releasing process for that. I also have, for example, the level 1 online course, which you can access anywhere you are in the world in the comfort of your home. You will have free access then as well to the level 1 WhatsApp support group 24/7. There's so many amazing practitioners there that you can ask for support and help and guidance and advice. I'm on there as well, so I interact there too. We have the webinars as well for the level 1 online course that's free every fortnight, meaning every second week. You can send me questions and I'll answer your questions, and it's live so we can interact, we can talk. Or you can come to the level 2 live event, which level 1 online course is a prerequisite to. And you can learn how to do it yourself and just step into your greatness. So there's so many options that you can do and take. And just for those of you who's perhaps in a really challenging place right now, which I'm sure there's many. I mean, life has become more challenging than what it used to be. What you can do is just imagine like a beautiful white ball of light in your mind. Right? And that's now going, and we're going to be playful. We're pretending that represents your consciousness. Like that's also your intention. All your awareness is now being zoned into this beautiful ball of light around your mind. Wherever the emotional stress is in your body, like the home for it, the starting point for it, or if it's a physical ailment, you're going to allow that beautiful ball of light to drop down into where the emotion is or where the ailment is being stuck. And allow that light to just be there for a few seconds and just see or sense what message comes forward. And being present with the message. You know, first of all, number 1 is stop fighting how you're feeling. Stop fighting your body from trying to tell you how it's feeling. Because when you fight it, you make it worse. When you add resistance to it, the pain actually increases. When you actually add acceptance and tolerance and understanding, it decreases the pain. And with that awareness of what the messages are, I invite you then to try what's called the alpha brainwave state. This is also part of the level 1 course. If you choose to go through that, you'll learn that there. And it's breathing in the mouth, out the nose. And 10 times really deep. And then on the last breath in the mouth, and hold. Hold it for as long as you can. You're going to feel dizzy. And then, you know, and here's the beautiful part. You're going to have so many of your intuition, so many answers is going to start coming forward. You're going to have aha moments. You're going to have perhaps visions. You're going to have some sense of awareness that wasn't there before. It's going to start coming forward. And then just allowing yourself in your mind, like just drop into that dizziness and make sure that you lie down. It's kind of more fun. You do that. And then just drop into that dizziness and just be in that space where you have awareness of where the ailment is or the emotional stress is, because you'll start to feel a slight relief, not 100%, slight relief, especially if you have anxiety. Alpha brainwave state gives you a tremendous relief. It's a really powerful technique for that. Very, very powerful. Or if you're panicking, an excellent technique. If you have post-traumatic stress disorder, excellent. I have a video actually coming out about post-traumatic stress disorder very, very soon. So keep an eye on my YouTube channel for advice how to deal with situations like that. And also then just be with that process. Be with the process, because now at least what you have is 50% of the problem. Remember, awareness of a problem is a problem half solved. And then you can go, for example, if you like tapping, or if you like to do different exercises, you know, strenuous exercises to really get the stress and the adrenaline cortisol out of your body. Go do that then, but have this awareness and just exercise it out, walk it out, go for a swim. Meditate even. Meditate has been proven now, you know, to have an actual change in the brain, and also promoting, you know, inner peace. Gratitude as well, but, you know, telling someone to practice gratitude when they're in a place of pain, good luck, you know? Yeah. So start with the basics, and that's the alpha brainwave state, that's breathing, because you're going into what's called the highest brainwave state, which is the gamma brainwave state, and that's what releases the DMT in the pineal gland. So you're going to go on a trip naturally, but also you're going to find phenomenal deep answers within yourself.
Yes, the technique is like breathing in through the mouth and out through the nose.
Out the nose.
Yeah.
10 times, and hold the last breath, but it needs to be deep breaths, and hold it as long as you can, and then exhale.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great advice, and really practical. So something.
It is. It's easy. You know, if you ever. Yeah. So sorry, just one thing I wanted to quickly add. What's important, especially if you have a panic attack or you have severe anxiety, if you're sitting, just put your shoulders back and look up. Just look at the ceiling, because what happens is, especially when your throat closes,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening is that the brain goes through like almost like a fake hypoxia. It thinks that it can breathe, but you can. So if you just look up and you like, if you just breathe like that, it's almost impossible not to get air in. It's impossible. You can breathe, right? So just having that feeling of I can breathe already calms down the body. Because now the body like, okay, I can breathe. I'm kind of okay. I can breathe, and then do the breathing, going to the alpha brainwave set in the mouth and out the nose. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that can definitely help a lot. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of it, and I can really feel your passion for it. You're super passionate about it.
I love it so much. It's my joy.
Yeah, and it has really helped me a lot. I also have like both of your books as well, and when I have something, I always kind of peek into it, or also sometimes when I work with clients, when they mention something, I always kind of look into it, what it might be. So I think definitely for people who are practitioner, healthcare practitioners, or maybe trauma practitioners, it can be really helpful to just get a copy of it and really look into it. It can really support you in your practice. But I think it's also great, but I love it for personal use as well, to just look into it. And it's really accurate. So I think it's amazing how you managed to do it, to make it so accurate. So thank you so much for it.
No, thank you to you too.
Yeah, and also for people who are listening, I'll also put the link to Evette's website in the description as well. So, and also the things she mentioned, just so it's easier for you to find. And yeah, I really want to thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, and thank you to you for your time and your energy, and also your dedication for, supporting your followers and supporting your people, because you are a mover and a shaker yourself. So, from one supporter to another, thank you to you too for creating the space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
and everyone,
you.
thank you for listening.